This video is a little bit about the history of game theory, and then we're going to define it. Game theory was invented basically by a couple of mathematicians studying why people make certain choices in parlor games, thus the name game theory. It's been developed ever since then. It's been applied to war strategy. 6 Nobel Prizes have been awarded for its use in economics. And a good deal of research has been done. It is also a science. It's a branch of mathematics, but it's also a science because scientists have done a number of studies to check hypotheses generated by game theory. So what's the definition of game theory? Games are defined by their 4 parts. There's players who are strategically connected to one another. And what that means is that the decisions that the players make affect the outcomes for both of them. There are rules by which the game has to be played. In litigation, those rules are largely dictated by law, but in the bargaining process, the lawyers can develop the rules for the game. There are payoffs. There are gains and losses associated with how the game turns out. And there are choices. It is not a game of chance. It's a game of strategy and choices where the choices affect the outcomes. Games come in 3 forms. The first form is a normal form game. A normal form game is a game that is played one time, there's a payoff, and the game is over. Think of a hand of poker. The cards are dealt, the players make their bets, somebody wins and walks away with the pot. That's a normal form game. In divorce, it might be who gets the house. The focus is on content in normal form games. For example, with the who gets the house issue, the focus is on the valuation of the house, whether one of the parties has a superior claim to the house, who wants the house, who can afford the house, and what the trade-offs might be involved in the financial settlement in order for one of the parties to get the house. There are repeated form games, which are games that are played over and over to an endpoint. Child support in divorce is an example. There is content at the beginning based on the incomes and relative needs of the parties and on the schedule. And so child support is agreed upon at the beginning of the divorce, but then there are procedures put in place for making future adjustments to child support, and then that ends when the children become adults. There's a special form of repeated form game called an extensive repeated form game. That's a game that is played over and over but has no endpoint. The co-parenting relationship is a good example of an extensive repeated form game because it's played over and over even when the children are adults. The emphasis in extensive repeated form game is on procedures. Sometimes there are hybrids in which there's a normal form game and a repeated form game. Spousal support can be that hybrid. There might be an initial award of a certain amount of spousal support up to a date certain, and yet that can be challenged again in the future in court, and the game can be played again. In game theory directed bargaining, the solution is a plan at the time of the day of the judgment of divorce for the parties' futures. Why is this important? It's important because game theory research informs us that if the parties use game theory principles to bargain through a cooperative phase first and incorporating the objective and subjective payoff values to the game, they can end up growing the pie, so to speak, to 146% of what it would have been had they not used the game theory principles. In traditional family law, after transaction costs, the parties divide 100%. Using game theory bargaining, the parties divide 146%.